Hello and welcome to the Origins of Islam. Today we want to conclude our observations of the Codex Parisino Petropolitanus. So first let us quickly recap where we left off last time. We have created a theory which makes sense of many of the oddities that we have observed by looking at old commentaries and the biography of the Prophet. We've confirmed that Surah 4 verse 12 has been revised. Now let's look at some more changes that were made. This time, let us look at folio 20R of the Codex Parisino Petropolitanus. R stands for recto, which denotes the front side of the folio. On this folio, we have 27 lines of text, which is a lot more crammed than almost any other page in this codex. The 8 preceding pages all have 23 lines, which is certainly an interesting change. Typically, we have between 21 and 24 lines per page. Pages with more lines are really the exception. Now, this folio 20R contains Surah 4 verses 161 to 173. Now, let's look at the reverse side of that same folio. Here we have 25 lines, 24 lines of text plus one empty line in order to separate the next surah. This folio contains Surah 4 verse 173 to Surah 5 verse 4. And what we see is a highly irregular spacing. The first 6 lines go into the margins, which is completely novel for the entire codex. And not only do the first 6 lines go into the margins, the line height is also lower than on the rest of the page. So you can see this white rectangle. If we move that anywhere else on the screen, instead of 6 lines, it always only contains 5 lines. So let's again zoom in a bit into those top 6 lines. Now, normally, the scribe put in 2 rows of 3 horizontal dots as verse separator. But there's one instance where we have 4 vertical dots as verse separator. Note that the scribe was using the Syrian verse ending system, which separates the verses slightly differently compared to the system used in the modern day Cairo Quran. But of course, we're mostly interested in the word kalala, which we now know used to be kalla. As we can see here, we have the regular Hijazi kaf, which we've seen on folio 10. Also this time there are no edits or crammed in lams or anything of the sort. So there are no issues here. This word was always kalala. Still, the overall layout of folio 20 demands an explanation. Why are there 27 lines on 20R and why are the first 6 lines on 20V so crammed? We actually find the answer by turning back one page. Before folio 20, another page has been removed. The text is however still continuous and no verses are missing. The missing page comes from the same piece of parchment as the ones before and after. How do we know that? In this manuscript, one large piece of parchment was turned into 8 folios by folding it 3 times. So the person binding the book, he would start out with large rectangular pieces of parchment. He would fold it 3 times, and then this folded piece of parchment would be bound together with other pieces of parchment. And then once the codex is done, the pages are cut open with a knife, and then you end up with 8 pages per parchment. Due to the nature of the folding, there is an alternating pattern of flesh and hair side on every folio. So you have flesh, hair, hair, flesh, flesh, hair, hair, flesh. Here, however, we only have 7 folios from one piece of parchment and the pattern is broken precisely where the page is missing. So what does this missing page tell us? The scribe removed the missing folio before writing on the next page. We know that because neither verses nor subsequent folios are missing. He removed the folio presumably because of an error that couldn't be corrected. Must have been a major error, else he could have corrected it on the folio itself, like he did on folio 10, where he added a second lam to the word kalla in order to turn it into kalala. So what was the error? Let's recap real quick. This folio 20, which the scribe used instead of the missing page, has several oddities. 20R has 27 lines, where the folios before all have 23 lines. And 20V has a unique spacing and different line heights when comparing top to bottom. It therefore seems like the scribe had to fit in a lot more text than he first anticipated. Which means an entire verse was missing. Namely verse 176, which incidentally takes up 6 lines, exactly the amount of lines the scribe added to folios 20R and 20V combined. Which means that another prediction from our model has been confirmed. Here we get the next tick. Unfortunately, this is where the manuscript evidence leaves us, but let's look at what we have so far. Remember that it all started with the verse in the middle, Surah 33:37. This verse was first found in Muqtil ibn Sulaiman's tafsir, suggesting that it was a later addition. But the traditions around it also disagreed with Surah 4:23, meaning it must have been revised too. And everything started rolling from there. That is how we developed this whole theory. We found out that these verses are crucial parts in making Muhammad the seal of the prophets. Based on that, we have deduced 9 specific predictions, 3 of which could be tested, and all 3 turned out to be correct. In all 3 cases did we find tampering with one of the oldest manuscripts, and it's not that there were signs of tampering throughout the manuscript. No, the changes occurred precisely in the predicted places. That means that our theory is validated as much as a theory on a historical issue can be validated. So really we can now give us ticks across the board, because it is unlikely that our theory is right in those 3 places but wrong everywhere else. And by the way, remember that we have also solved the age-old problem of the word kalala, which puzzled the early scholars to no end. But we're still not at the end, because with everything we found out so far, we can now accurately reconstruct what must have happened with our manuscript, which will also tie up one more loose end. So what we are likely looking at is a scenario in which an old Quran manuscript existed, which did not yet include the changes that we've talked about in the last few videos, and which had to be replaced, either because it was missing those crucial bits, or because it fell apart, or for any other reason. So a scribe produced a copy which was supposed to contain the changes, confirming Muhammad's sonlessness and hence his status as the seal of the prophets. But luckily for us, the scribe made some mistakes, which now reveal the truth. In Surah 4:12, the scribe didn't pay attention and copied the word kala from his template, forgetting that after the changes it was supposed to be kalala. But this was a minor error, and he could somewhat fix the issue by adding a second lam and redrawing the kaf. But when copying the folio with the last verses of Surah 4, he forgot that he had to add the new verse 176. He faithfully copied the old manuscript line by line. Only then did he realize that he made a mistake and he had to remove an entire page. But now he had a problem. He was following the layout of the template. Were he to just write as normal while adding in a long verse, like verse 176, he would need more than one folio to do so, which would mess up his entire approach. So he had to make sure that the folio ended with the same word as his template. In order to achieve that, he crammed in as much as he could on folio 20R in order to make up for the space needed on 20V. The scribe had to add the new verse, but he did not want to change the number of verses. So he merged verses 173 and 174 according to the Syrian verse ending system. Unlike everywhere else, he did not leave room for the verse separators, thereby keeping Surah 4 at 175 verses as it used to be. Only later was the separator reintroduced. But because of the lack of space, it had to be represented by 4 vertical dots. That's why we have this different verse separator in this space. Once our scribe had added the first 6 lines of folio 20V, it was time to add the new verse, 176. The scribe knew that he would need 6 lines for the new verse. He probably practiced on a scrap piece of paper, and he saw that if he continued like he did at the top of the page, he wouldn't be able to completely fill the page, which once again would have ruined his approach of copying the old text line by line, folio by folio. So at that point he increased margin and spacing again. He added the new verse and then followed the template so that the page ended with the same word as did the old manuscript. In conclusion, we can say that Surah 33:40, which contains one of the only 4 mentions of the word Muhammad in the Quran and the only one that clearly refers to the Prophet of Islam, was not originally part of the Quran. Our reconstruction and the errors made by the scribe of the Codex Parisino Petropolitanus prove as much. So in summary, what have we learned in this video series? Muhammad's biography was written in order to provide context to the Quran. After the original context, the Bible and the Apocrypha were lost, many passages appeared to be nonsensical and required a new explanation, which was then the basis for the life of Muhammad. During a later editing process, the Sirah itself influenced the contents of the Quran. Solidifying dogma was one reason why the Sirah was used to revise the Quran. One such dogma was the belief that Muhammad was the last prophet. Source analysis strongly indicates that several verses were inserted or changed in order to make Muhammad the seal of the prophets. Scribal errors inside the Codex Parisino Petropolitanus verify this theory. And with that, we're at the end for today. Thank you very much for watching and see you next time.